They say marriages fall apart over big things: money, betrayal, irreconcilable differences. Mine started to come undone over a stapler. Yes, a stapler. It wasn't just any stapler, of course. It was a matte gray, no-nonsense swing line, a relic from my bachelor days, proudly sitting on the edge of my desk for 11 solid years of our marriage. The thing stapled better than gravity. It had personality, grit, a slight dent on the side from the time I dropped it during tax season 2017. It added character. And then one Tuesday morning, it was gone. At first, I assumed the usual suspects: chaos, clutter, entropy. But I'm not the kind of man who misplaces things. I still have receipts from 2009 and a perfectly alphabetized collection of Allen wrenches in a drawer labeled W. That stapler was not just some desk ornament. It was a constant in a life increasingly full of variables. So, I did what any self-respecting, slightly obsessive husband would do. I asked Megan. She blinked at me from behind her coffee cup like I'd asked if she'd seen the Holy Grail in the fridge. I don't know. Maybe you left it at work? She offered, in that tone spouses use when they're pretty sure you're slowly losing it, but are still invested enough to pretend otherwise. I work from home, I replied flatly. Oh, right, she said, and took a sip, avoiding eye contact in the way people do when they've either hidden a body or moved a stapler and don't want to admit it. Now, this might seem petty, but here's where it gets odd. A day later, I found the stapler in Megan's car, under the passenger seat, along with a set of business cards for a local arts nonprofit I'd never heard of, a pack of sugar-free gum she doesn't chew, and a pair of sunglasses that looked suspiciously masculine. Megan doesn't work for an arts nonprofit. Megan works from our kitchen, running a handmade soap Etsy store named Lather, Rinse, Revolt. Her life revolves around essential oils, vintage fonts, and passive-aggressively worded shipping policies. I held the stapler like it was a piece of evidence and brought it into the house. Megan was on a Zoom call, probably lecturing someone about the benefits of goat milk and lemongrass, so I waited, patiently, like the stapler deserved. When she finally emerged, I set it on the table with all the drama of a courtroom exhibit. Look what turned up. She glanced at it. Oh, you found it. In your car. There was a pause. A very specific kind of pause. The kind that falls into a room when one person knows exactly what's going on and the other is about to find out the truth, but hasn't yet figured out just how far off the trail they are. And just like that, the whole thing started to unravel. Now, you'd expect me to follow the scent of mystery and dig into the usual. Secret text messages, suspicious receipts, someone named Chad or Brent. But no, that's not how this story plays out. Instead, I took a different approach. I went to the source of all modern chaos and clarity, community theater. It started with those business cards, West Willow Arts Collective. Sounded harmless. Boring, even. Like a place where someone's aunt would direct a painfully long adaptation of our town. But the stapler, Megan's sudden interest in theater, and her Friday night board meetings didn't quite line up. So I volunteered. Yes, me, Walter Bishop, spreadsheet enthusiast, moderate Republican, volunteer usher. The first night, I handed out programs with a retired gym teacher named Carl who smelled like pickled eggs and regret. He told me all about the group, how tight-knit they were, how rehearsals often ran late, how intimate the cast became over time. Lot of drama on and off stage, he said, with the kind of grin that suggested he'd seen things. Scandalous things, possibly involving costumes. I nodded, pretending not to care, but every bit of me was listening. And then I saw him. Him. Trevor. Of course his name was Trevor. Trevor had that vaguely European beard thing, like he'd been in a cologne commercial or a yogurt ad. He wore scarves indoors, talked with his hands, called people darling. And there was Megan, laughing at something he said like he'd just reinvented oxygen. She wore a graphic tee that said, "Rehearsal is life." I had never seen that shirt before in my life. Now listen, I'm not the jealous type. I've watched The Notebook without flinching. I understand that people can have friends, passions, hobbies. But Trevor was not just a coworker. He wasn't just a director. Trevor was theater boyfriend material. And my wife? She was starring in his one-act play titled A Body in Bloom. Yes, that's a real title. I saw the flyer. There was a flower, wilted and symbolic, I assume. I didn't confront her right away. I'm not a fool. No one wins in Act 1. I waited. I gathered. I became what I had once mocked, a theater person. 3 weeks in, I'd learned to distinguish between blocking and stage direction. I'd memorized the entire monologue Megan delivered in scene 3 about the fragile pulse of connection. And I'd started keeping a journal. The entries were less about the theater and more about observing Megan. How she lit up around Trevor. How she didn't correct him when he got her coffee order wrong. How she laughed too easily at his terrible puns. Trevor called her Megs. I had called her Megan for 11 years. She had never once asked me to shorten it. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I auditioned. Yep. I walked up to Trevor one night after rehearsal and said, "You got room for one more?" He looked me over like I was an ad-lib in the middle of Shakespeare, but he said yes. Out of pity or curiosity, I don't know. Probably both. And that's how I ended up in A Body in Bloom, playing the role of Gregory, the emotionally distant husband. Which, I must admit, was on the nose. Megan didn't speak to me for 2 days after the cast list was posted. But I didn't care, because I had a plan. I waited until opening night, until the auditorium filled with folding chairs and lukewarm coffee, and the scent of desperation masked with stage makeup, until the spotlight hit center stage, until it was time for scene 3, the one where Megan delivers her tearful speech about love, betrayal, and blooming too late. And that's when I stood up. Not in character, not on script, just me, Walter. I walked to center stage, took the prop flower from her hand, and looked her dead in the eye. "Megan," I said, "I forgive you for taking my stapler, but not for Trevor." The audience applauded, thought it was a twist. Trevor cried. Megan froze, and I exited stage left. It didn't take long after my stage debut for things to get uncomfortably interesting. For one, Megan didn't speak to me for 4 days. Not the dramatic, storm-out kind of silence either. This was bureaucratic silence. She moved around the house like a middle manager on Casual Friday. All size, drawer slams, and self-important paper shuffling. Everything she did had the emotional tone of a tax audit, which I suppose made sense, given the level of passive aggression she'd clearly mastered. Trevor, meanwhile, had a breakdown. A quiet one, but visible if you knew what to look for. I saw him backstage during the second show, staring into the mirror like it owed him money. He ran his hands through his perfectly floppy hair and muttered to himself about emotional boundaries and integrity of the work. I would have offered him a tissue or a glass of room temperature disappointment, but I figured he needed space. The funny thing about community theater is that it runs on the illusion that everything matters deeply. Every cue is life or death. Every costume change is sacred. People argue over the direction of a sigh. I once watched 2 grown adults debate for 20 minutes whether a character would realistically sit on stage left or stage right while grieving. One of them cried, not in character, real tears, over fake grief, while I stood there holding a plastic potted plant, wondering how I'd gotten involved in all of this in the first place. Except I knew exactly how. I was trying to catch my wife cheating, and I was doing it by memorizing stage directions and pretending to care about lighting gels. By the 3rd night of performances, Megan's tolerance for my creative involvement had bottomed out. During the cast dinner, a loosely organized potluck hosted in the rec room of a Presbyterian church, she spent most of the evening not making eye contact and aggressively laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Trevor, wearing a scarf despite it being 75 degrees indoors, hovered behind her like an anxious but fashion-forward shadow. He shot me glances that were equal parts dread and the kind of curiosity you'd reserve for a stranger who claims to remember your birthday. I played it cool. Or at least, my version of cool, which mostly involves folding paper napkins into geometric shapes and pretending to enjoy potato salad. That night, when we got home, Megan broke the silence. "You embarrassed me." I know. It was the highlight of my week. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she opened her laptop and began what I assumed was either a strongly worded email or a review of yoga mats. I left her to it and went to bed, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to lay there and think, which, in hindsight, is a deeply unsatisfying activity if you're not also committed to dramatic hand gestures. The next morning, I got a call from Frances DeWitt. Frances is 71, has a voice like crushed gravel, and runs the West Willow Arts Collective with the kind of iron-fisted diplomacy you usually only find in small-town HOA boards and cults. She doesn't believe in second chances or third acts. She also has a long-standing feud with modern choreography and anyone under the age of 30. Walter, she said, we need to talk about your little surprise. Francis, I replied, we all needed to talk about it. That's why I did it in front of an audience. She made a noise that sounded like a filing cabinet slamming shut. You've disrupted the dynamic. Trevor's in a mood, Megan's pretending nothing happened, and I've had to rewrite 2 scenes so we don't lose donors. Donors? Yes, Walter. People give us money because they think we're respectable. I resisted the urge to say something about Trevor's interpretive dance in Act 4. Instead, I said, I just wanted to understand what was going on. With my wife. With all of it. There was a long pause. Then show up to rehearsal tonight. We're doing blocking for the final scene. You want answers? Watch her perform it. Click. That's how I ended up sitting in the front row of the multipurpose room at the Civic Center, watching my wife stand under fluorescent lights, pouring out her soul in a monologue that was definitely not subtle. It went something like, he was always just there, like a shelf, functional, reliable, never noticed until you needed to put something heavy on him. At one point, she mimed unscrewing a metaphorical jar of expectations. Trevor was standing offstage, nodding like he'd just discovered fire. After she finished, the room was quiet. Too quiet. Francis stood up. Take 5. People scattered. I didn't move. Megan walked past me without a glance. So I followed her. Not creepily. Just casually. I figured if this was going to fall apart, I might as well be present for it. She stopped outside by the vending machine. The air smelled like detergent and whatever emotionless snacks are made of. You followed me, she said without turning around. Yep. You're not going to make a scene again, are you? Nope. Then what do you want? I want to know why you needed to rehearse your feelings for me with someone named Trevor. She turned, leaned against the machine. Because I couldn't say them at home. You'd just nod and go back to whatever spreadsheet you were designing for your sock drawer. I like order. She stared at me. And I liked feeling alive again, she said. Now, I know what you're thinking. That was the moment. The big reveal. But no, that wasn't it. That was just Megan's attempt at amateur poetry and emotional evasion. The real twist came 2 days later when I was called in by Francis again. This time, not to lecture me, but to congratulate me. Walter, she said, adjusting her glasses with military precision, the audience loves you. I barely have lines. Exactly. You're the most grounded thing in the whole play. The audience sees themselves in you. Confused, suspicious, slightly allergic to nonsense. You're getting fan mail. She handed me a pile of letters. Not emails. Real paper letters. Who writes letters? I asked. People who remember what integrity looks like. And envelopes. That night, during the performance, something changed. Megan looked at me during the final scene. Really looked. Not in character. Not in rehearsal mode. Just looked. And I realized something. She wasn't just cheating on me with Trevor. She was cheating on reality. And she needed an audience to do it. And I was just supposed to applaud. But I didn't. Megan and I were no strangers to awkward conversations. We'd had the classics. Why the dishwasher doesn't clean knives unless you face them down, whether or not resting your eyes counts as sleeping, and the eternal debate over whether folding laundry while watching TV makes it a shared activity. But this one was different. This one was going to require chairs without wheels and at least one person pretending to listen. It started the morning after our final performance of A Body in Bloom, the now sold-out local play in which I had unwittingly been cast as both a supporting character and some sort of minor town celebrity. Apparently, people love when someone keeps it real, which in this case meant blinking a lot, standing stiffly, and refusing to emote. Megan walked into the living room holding a printed-out email. That's how you know things are serious. When someone sacrifices a sheet of paper to deliver news instead of just forwarding the link. She placed it on the coffee table like it was an artifact. What's that? I asked, not moving from the couch. It's from Francis. She wants us to audition for the next show. She says we have natural tension. Well, that's not inaccurate. I didn't pick up the paper. I didn't need to. I could already see how this conversation was going to unfold. Megan would suggest that theater had become an outlet, that working together might help us reconnect, and that Francis saw potential. She'd use words like energy and creative space, and pretend the past month hadn't felt like a weird hybrid of an office birthday party and a social experiment. But that wasn't what got to me. It was that Megan wanted to keep going like everything was normal. So I said something I hadn't planned to say. Is Trevor auditioning too? She looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? I don't know. Just curious if your scene partner will be joining us again. Since you two clearly have such strong stage chemistry. Or whatever euphemism people are using now. She didn't answer right away, which was already its own answer. I waited, because I'm a professional at waiting. I once waited 3 hours at the DMV without blinking. Silence doesn't scare me. It usually scares the other person first. He's taking time off, she said finally. He needs space. After everything. Everything like rehearsals? Or everything like his ongoing emotional affair with someone else's wife. You're twisting things. Am I? Because I feel like if there were a real-time emotional graph of your interactions over the past month, the chart would look a lot like the stock market in a panic. She sat down across from me and crossed her arms. A classic Megan move. It's what she did when she was ready to deflect by pretending she was tired, misunderstood, or deeply inconvenienced by the existence of consequences. You inserted yourself into something that was never about you, she said. No, I inserted myself into something that suddenly involved me. In our living room. And our shared tax return. She rolled her eyes, which I'd been assured by her mother is how she processes guilt, though it mostly looked like how people react when they realize they've bought the wrong size batteries. You don't understand what it's like to feel seen, she said, as if this were a monologue and I was the lighting tech. Seen? I echoed. Megan, you sell soap with funny labels on the internet. You have 12,000 followers. You're seen more than most small businesses. That's not what I meant. No, I get it. Trevor gazed at you like you were a lost Shakespearean sonnet, and I gazed at you like someone who lives with another person and shares toothpaste. Very unromantic. She exhaled slowly, dramatically. I half expected someone from the theater to pop out and yell, "Cut." That's a wrap. And here's where it got interesting. Not with a confession, not with a sobbing apology, but with a PowerPoint. The next day, Megan called it talk. That's her word. I prefer forced appointment. She brought her laptop and sat me down like she was pitching a new business idea on Shark Tank. Slide 1. Reevaluating our relationship. Slide 2. Understanding emotional gaps. Slide 3. A photo of a lighthouse, for some reason. She spoke like she was reading from cue cards provided by a corporate therapist. Words like disconnect, emotional bandwidth, and narrative realignment were thrown around with the same energy as people reading the terms and conditions on a software update. I let her go on for about 7 slides before I interrupted. Is this going somewhere? Or are we building up to a sponsored segment? She gave me the look of someone who just realized their GPS was giving bad directions, but was too stubborn to admit it. The point, she said, is that us, it's become something functional. Predictable. So you rehearsed a different version. With Trevor. That wasn't the point of the play. No, the point of the play was to explore the human condition. The point of your rehearsal breaks was to explore someone else's cologne. She didn't laugh. Shame, because that was my best line of the week. And that's when she said it. Not I cheated. Not, there's someone else. She said, it wasn't physical. Which, of course, is the diet version of a confession. Half the guilt, none of the calories. It was just emotional. I nodded slowly. So, like a subscription with a free trial. But you didn't download anything. That's a gross analogy. Is it less gross than building a relationship with a man who wears scarves indoors? We didn't yell. We didn't cry. We didn't even raise our voices. It was like 2 HR representatives having a meeting about an expired coffee policy. All documentation, no resolution. And then she stood up, closed her laptop, and said something incredibly honest. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. I waited a beat. Then said, you could have tried using words. I hear they're still pretty effective. That night, she slept in the guest room. Or rather, she pretended to. I heard her pacing. I didn't check on her. Not because I was angry, but because I was suddenly very, very tired. There's a particular type of revenge that doesn't involve shouting, slashing tires, or suspicious fires behind garden sheds. It's the kind that quietly rearranges the furniture of someone's self-image until they start tripping over their own delusions. And that was the direction I chose. Because if you're going to deal with betrayal, you might as well do it with some office supplies, a public library, and a limited-time promotional campaign. Let's back up. After the PowerPoint incident, Megan and I existed in what can best be described as a diplomatic stalemate. We spoke only when necessary, like co-workers forced to share a cubicle during budget cuts. She spent her time answering customer service emails about soap made with Himalayan salt and moon energy, while I worked from the garage on a project I never intended to keep secret. You see, Megan had the spotlight. She had followers, artful pictures of eucalyptus hanging above bathroom sinks, and her recent community theater stardom. She had Trevor's adoring glances and enough handcrafted bath bomb reviews to qualify as a low-level influencer. And what did I have? Spreadsheets, which is exactly what I needed. The plan was simple: rebrand myself. Not for her, not even for me, really, but for the world she thought she'd charmed into forgetting I existed. A soft reset, if you will, minus the yoga pants and expensive motivational workshops. So I created something new, Walter's Workshop. Not a podcast, not a self-help book, just a series of free, extremely dry, extremely detailed in-person classes at the West Willow Public Library titled How to Not Fall Apart While Your Spouse Finds Themselves Through Community Theater. The first one, standing room only. I opened with a slide. Black text, white background, nothing fancy. Title, Session 1. When you're emotionally replaced by a man who owns 6 scarves. People laughed. Then they kept coming. I covered topics like the importance of labeling household chargers, what to do when your spouse starts referring to you as energy draining, how to politely respond when asked if you'd consider taking a break to explore individuality, why no one actually likes kombucha, and it's okay to say it. I never used Megan's name. I didn't have to. Half the attendees were people from our neighborhood. Some had seen the play. Some had guessed what was happening. One guy brought his own chair and took notes like he was preparing for a final exam in pettiness. By week 3, a local blogger wrote a piece titled, The Man, the Myth, the Spreadsheet, Why Walter is the Voice of a Disappointed Generation. It got picked up by a lifestyle website. They called me a reluctant icon of suburban resilience. Megan found out when someone tagged her on Instagram. She didn't say anything for 2 days. Then, Saturday morning, I came into the kitchen and found her at the table with my course outline printed and highlighted. She was holding a red pen. Old habits. You're mocking me in front of strangers, she said. No, I'm mocking the situation. Which, by the way, I didn't create. You made a whole seminar series about being bitter. I made a free educational resource. I corrected. And I also made a downloadable calendar. People like structure. She folded her arms. You're doing this because you're hurt. Not really. I'm doing this because apparently emotional affairs are more socially acceptable when paired with interpretive dance. I'm just giving the other side a voice. A calm, sarcastic, incredibly organized voice. She stared at me like I was a Rubik's Cube with one square missing. Then she did the thing she always did when cornered. Changed the subject in a way that somehow made it my fault. You never supported my creative growth. You wrote a 2-act play about being spiritually suffocated by a man who alphabetizes his sock drawer. I built a spreadsheet for your Etsy taxes. I call that support. Are you going to stop this campaign? Nope. I'm expanding it. Which was true. I'd already booked a spot at the community center. Walter's Workshop, the emotional budgeting tour. Free admission. No registration required. Coffee provided by Craig's Donuts, thanks to a sponsorship deal I made after helping Craig fix his tax forms. The night of the first big event, I wore my best button-up and the expression of a man who's finally learned how to turn personal humiliation into brand growth. Megan didn't come, but her friend Darlene did. She took photos, asked questions, and complimented my slide transitions. The highlight of the evening? A Q&A portion titled, Ask Walter Anything. Someone asked if I missed Megan. I paused, thought carefully, then answered, I miss a version of her that probably didn't exist. They clapped. I think someone even whistled. When I got home, Megan was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. I walked past her to the kitchen. She followed. I read your quote. Which one? The one about me not existing. I said a version of you. There's a difference. You're real. Just not the version I thought signed up for shared bills and honesty. She leaned on the counter, staring at the microwave like it held life answers. I didn't think it would get this far, she said. Me neither. But here we are. I've got a merch table now. She blinked. You made merchandise? Tote bags. They say, not bitterness, just accurate record keeping. People love them. She didn't laugh. I did. Because what else do you do when your marriage becomes the backdrop for your most successful project? And that's how revenge works best. Not as a dramatic gesture, not as a scream, but as a quiet little empire of clarity built right in front of the person who thought you'd disappear. 3 weeks after Megan stopped referring to me as passive-aggressively clever and started referring to me as a distraction to her creative process, I decided we needed one final conversation. Not one of those pseudo-conversations where one person says, "We need to talk," and the other person immediately has heartburn. A real one. The kind where both parties stop pretending there's anything left to protect other than their sanity and utility bills. I scheduled it. That's right. I booked a time slot in our shared calendar, right between order packing and Zoom with Danielle, soap branding. I labeled it, Reality Sync, 30 minutes. Megan accepted the invite within 20 minutes, which was oddly professional of her, and also deeply unsettling. We met in the living room, the place where most of our greatest arguments had taken place. Debates over mattress firmness, thermostat settings, and whether or not hanging a shelf was a two-person job or a test of marital patience. This time, the room was clean, the lights were bright, and no one was pretending to be busy folding something that didn't need folding. She arrived with a notepad, not the spiral kind, but one of those faux leather planners with the little magnetic flap. I think she wanted me to know she was serious, or at least organized. I arrived with a pen that no longer clicked properly and an index card where I'd written the word closure in capital letters. "So," she said, sitting cross-legged in the chair across from mine, "where do we start? Let's skip the opening statements and go right to the part where we acknowledge the ship has left the harbor and neither of us is on it. That's dramatic for someone who organizes their receipts by expense category, and yet accurate." She nodded, scribbled something in her planner. Probably a note about me being emotionally sarcastic, which she once claimed was not a real thing, but then used against me during an argument about throw pillows. I took a breath, because despite my general composure, this wasn't exactly easy. There was still a small part of me holding on to something. Not Megan exactly. More like the image of a future that had gotten lost somewhere between soap launches and monologues about artistic identity. "I need to know something," I said. "And I'd appreciate it if you didn't answer like you're trying to sell me a vision board." She looked mildly offended, but motioned for me to continue. Was it ever really about Trevor? Or was he just the most convenient excuse available when you started writing me out of your story? She tapped her pen on her knee, thought about it. Then, with rare honesty, said, "It wasn't about him. He was just the first person who looked at me like I wasn't boring. So he mistook your inability to finish a sentence without a dramatic pause as depth. Or maybe he just listened." I smiled. "I listen. I just don't clap after every sentence. That's part of the problem." "No, the problem is you wanted applause." I offered feedback. That earned a smirk. A real one. Which, weirdly, made this even more depressing. We sat there in silence for a moment. Real silence. Not that heavy, guilt-laced one that hung in our house for weeks like expired air freshener. This one was clean. A bit sterile. Like a room that had already been cleared out. She closed her planner. "What do you want from this, Walter?" "I want to officially resign." "From what? The marriage?" "No. From the role of supporting character in a show I didn't audition for." She narrowed her eyes. "Is this about the play again?" "It's about everything that came after. Or more accurately, everything that didn't." Megan leaned forward. "Do you think you were perfect? That you never shut down emotionally, never buried your head in work, never forgot how to be a person?" "I know I did," I said, without flinching. "But I never invited someone else into the house to explain it to me with jazz hands." She sighed. The universal sign of wanting to argue but not having a legally approved point. "I'm not going to ask for you to stay," she said, finally. "I'm not even going to pretend like I know how we'd fix this. That's new. I guess I'm tired of writing scenes that never get performed." Then we're finally on the same page. We both stood. Not at the same time. That would have felt too much like a rom-com. I gathered my index card, she grabbed her planner, and we started the slow, quiet dance of unraveling a life together without making it a spectacle. "I'll move into the guest room for now," I said. "You can keep the master. It's where the good outlets are." Very generous. "Don't say I never gave you anything." As I walked out of the room, she said, "You're going to make this into one of your lessons, aren't you?" I already have a title. Exit Interviews. When Love Becomes a Business Casual Arrangement. Put me down as anonymous. Too late. You're already a case study. She laughed. A short, surprised one. I didn't join her. That was our last real conversation. Not the last time we spoke, not the last text or logistical exchange, but the last time anything resembling us stood in the same room. Megan moved out on a Wednesday. Not because it was symbolic or meaningful. She just said movers were cheaper midweek. That was the tone of our ending. Efficient. Quiet. The kind of separation that would be described as mutually adult by people who drink flavored sparkling water and use words like recalibrate in therapy. I didn't help her pack. Not out of pettiness, but because she didn't ask. We both respected that unspoken boundary like we were dividing up office furniture after a company merger. She took the mid-century bookshelf, her collection of novelty mugs with passive-aggressive quotes, and the throw pillows that had no discernible purpose other than being violently uncomfortable. She left the couch, the big gray one I picked out. The one she once said was a little too square, like your email sign-offs. I kept the couch, partly because I liked it, mostly because I was too tired to move it. After she left, I didn't immediately feel anything profound. There was no sweeping sense of freedom, no crushing weight of grief. Just an empty closet and a more responsive Wi-Fi connection. I folded her key into a blank envelope, wrote, "Return to sender," on it, and left it in the mailbox like I was sending back a subscription I never ordered. I went back to my usual schedule. Up at 7, toast at 7:15, quiet judgment of my neighbor's landscaping at 8. I kept running Walter's workshop at the community center. Attendance had grown steadily. We were up to session 9. Moving on when you still share streaming passwords. One woman cried during the part about having to make a new Netflix profile. I didn't. Somewhere around week 2 of post-Megan life, I started sleeping better. It wasn't immediate, but one day I woke up and realized I hadn't stared at the ceiling for 2 hours before falling asleep. I considered writing it on the calendar like an anniversary. Eventually, people stopped asking if I was okay. That was the true milestone. When your sadness no longer interrupts conversations. That's how you know you've graduated to functionally single. I saw Megan again 3 weeks later at the hardware store. She was in aisle 6. Comparing paint swatches like her life depended on selecting the perfect shade of willow fog. I walked by her cart and gave a polite nod. She nodded back. No speech. No tears. Just two people who once shared tax returns and now shared awkward eye contact near the caulk. The employee stocking shelves nearby whispered, "Was that your ex?" "Yes," I said. "And she still can't commit to a finish, satin or eggshell. It's a metaphor." He didn't laugh. But I did. After that, I did what anyone with too much free time and a newly empty house does. I cleaned the garage. Not as a therapeutic act. I just wanted to find the hammer. Which, as it turns out, Megan had taken. Not out of spite. She just believed it was theirs. The hammer. Not the house. The hammer. One evening, while reorganizing the tool rack, I found an old whiteboard I used to bring to work presentations back when I had a real office with coworkers who used buzzwords like synergy and didn't post about chakras on social media. I wiped it clean, pulled it into the living room, and wrote, "What's next?" across the top in block letters. Below that, I listed options. Start a podcast? No. Learn woodworking? Too many tutorials hosted by men named Gary. Travel? Passport expired. Write something? I circled that last one, mostly because it felt open-ended and vague enough to not require real effort right away. But the idea stuck. I didn't want to write about Megan. That story had told itself. I wanted to write something useful, practical, something the newer, sharper version of me might have read before his wife cast him as an obstacle in her personal rebranding arc. So I started outlining a book, Walter's Workshop, the Manual for Unexpected Exits. I wrote chapter titles like, "You Can't Fix What Wasn't on the Table," "Emotional Infidelity," and other soft-cover novels. When the soap business outgrows the marriage. It wasn't petty. It wasn't mean. It was honest. And surprisingly funny. I didn't pull punches, but I didn't throw them either. I wanted it to feel like having coffee with someone who's already made every mistake you're about to make and has the laminated checklist to prove it. My neighbor Pete, who'd spent 30 years married to someone who collected ceramic pigs and never let him grill unsupervised, offered to read the first few chapters. "This is actually good," he said, shocked. "Thanks for the surprise." "No. I mean, I thought it'd be you ranting about essential oils and drama club." That's chapter 6. The thing is, writing the book wasn't some cathartic journey. I didn't find myself or redefine my identity. I just realized that for the first time in a while, I wasn't reacting. I was building. One Saturday morning, months after Megan left, I got an email from a small indie publisher. They wanted to discuss the manuscript. Apparently, one of their interns had attended a session of Walter's workshop and passed along some of the printed materials, including the infamous relationship exit checklist and the post-it that read, "Not all growth needs a yoga mat." They offered me a deal. Modest advance. No fanfare, but a real ISBN and an editor who didn't use words like soulful pause. I signed the contract, took the check, and used part of it to buy a new hammer. My own, with a neon green handle, so there'd be no confusion. The day the proof copy arrived, I flipped through it slowly, page by page, stopping occasionally to marvel at how many bullet points my emotional unraveling had produced. It was neat, structured, readable, which, ironically, was everything my marriage hadn't been. Later that week, I bumped into Megan again, this time at the post office. She had a box under her arm. I had an envelope. We nodded again. As she passed, she said, "I heard about the book." "Yeah." She shrugged. "A friend sent me a quote. The one about jazz hands. That one tested well." We stood there, half facing each other, like two people waiting for a weather update. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "I know. You okay?" "Mostly. You." "I'm getting there." We didn't hug. We didn't agree to catch up. We just parted ways. And it was fine. Not dramatic. Not profound. Just fine. Which, honestly, was enough. Walter Bishop. Single. Published. And finally, not waiting on anyone else's lines. Subscribe to the channel